In July of 2023, Duelist Nexus would be released to the TCG, and with it came not only the support for the Unchained archetype that soon became the top deck of the format, but also a new archetype known as Chimera. Hey guys, Otaku here, and welcome to an in-depth look into Chimera. In this series, I will deep dive into the mechanics, deck lists, and combos of the discussed archetype to give you, the viewer, a better understanding on how to play the deck. But I will also be going over the choke points and where to hit the deck when playing against it. So be sure to show your support by liking the video below and subscribe for more in-depth content. Chimera is a control-style fusion deck composed mostly of retrains of the cards Yugi used in the anime and the newly introduced typing Illusion monsters. The design of the deck is to fuse specific monsters to make one of a few possible options using the quick play spell Chimera Fusion, which can then return itself to your hand from the graveyard to be used later in the game. There are currently 3 possible fusion options. Chimera, the king of phantom beasts, can rip a random card from your opponent's hand in the end phase. Baphomet, the mythical king of phantom beasts, can foolish burial any beast, fiend, or illusion monster. And Chimera, the illusion beast, is the boss monster that gives the deck an OTK strategy. All 3 of these monsters have the same effect that changes their name to Chimera, the flying mythical beast, while on the field or in the graveyard. And by controlling a Chimera, the flying mythical beast, Mirror Sword Knight becomes a monster negate, and Kotal becomes a target negate and destroy. The main monsters being used to make these powerful fusions are Gazelle, King of the Mythical Claws, which when used as a fusion material can search any illusion monster, and Big Winged Baphomet, which when used as a fusion material can revive any illusion monster from the graveyard. Since the release of the Chimera archetype, Baphomet, the mythical king of phantom beasts, has been the only direct support to the deck. However, due to Gazelle being able to search any illusion monster upon being used as a fusion material, all future illusion monsters are essentially indirect support for this deck. And the most recent example of this is Nightmare Apprentice and Diabell's the original Sin Keeper. Although neither of these cards mention Chimera in either way, due to being illusion monsters, they can be searched off of Gazelle's effect. And it is thanks to these 2 cards specifically that Chimera has started to see its time in the meta spotlight once again. Upon its release, the Chimera archetype was a very meta contending deck, being one of the few decks that had a great matchup against the top dog, pun intended, Unchained. It was originally splashed with a small branded engine consisting of 3 branded fusion and 1 to 2 Fallen of Albaz. However, the deck was swiftly power crept out of the meta once Snake Eyes hit the scene. But upon the release of Legacy of Destruction, the deck once again has its chance to shine. To start, the deck is a direct counter to the new kid on the block, Tenpai. Tenpai is a deck that revolves around building a board in the battle phase and dealing an absurd amount of damage. However, almost all the illusion monsters have the same effect that both monsters involved in the battle of an illusion monster cannot be destroyed by battle, making it very difficult for Tenpai to touch your life points. And to top things off, Diabell's the original Sin Keeper, which is essentially an anti-spell fragrance, has become a very easy to search and summonable card in this deck. Chimera, the king of mythical beasts, has a secondary effect that when he's in the graveyard, on your opponent's turn you can banish him from the graveyard for cost and summon any beast, fiend, or illusion monster from your graveyard. The deck takes full advantage of this effect by summoning very powerful monsters that can lock your opponent out of the game, such as Barrier Statue of the Abyss, Tiger King Wengu, the End of Anubis, and now Diabell's the original Sin Keeper. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of the builds I've put together, but also discuss the combos and choke points of the deck. Alright, so I have concocted 2 builds for the Chimera archetype, one of which being the pure version, which, as I said before, has a little more wiggle room to grow now that the new support has been released, but also I have a list for Branded Chimera, which is my personal favorite version of the deck. We're going to start with the pure version of the deck, and normally I'm not a fan of running non-engine hand traps in fusion decks because fusion decks are resource dependent, so you don't really want to be pitching away the hand traps to the graveyard and not being able to use them. However, in Chimera, they do have a little more utilization, but also the deck has a lot of room for non-engine. Even though we're running a 48 card pile, the deck still has a lot of room to use these hand traps, especially since we're in a format where you want to be running like 15 plus hand traps in one deck, but also be able to run its normal engine and still kind of function. So for the non-engine hand traps, we run 3 Ash Blossom, 3 Ghost Ogre, 2 Nibiru, and 3 Infinite Impermanent, with the ability to also use them as cross-out targets because this deck has a fair bit of choke points and this deck can lose to just 2 hand traps. But as for the rest of the deck, the in-engine is 2 Big Wing Baphomet, 3 Cornfield Kotal, 1 Diabell's, 3 Gazelle, 1 Master Tau, and 3 Mirror Sword Knight with the 3 Chimera Fusion. Pretty much that's just standard for any version of the deck. There's not really any deviations. We do, of course, run the Edge Imp package with 2 Edge Imp Chain, 3 Patchwork, and 2 Poly. We run the 3 Super Poly, and then we run 3 of the Nightmare Apprentice and 1 of the Diabells, of course. Now, as for something that not a lot of people are noticing, but something I've kind of concocted on my own, is running 1 Unchained Soul of Shyama. This card is, well, it's a fiend, but also it's a level 6, something that a lot of the in-archetype Chimera cards are. We, of course, have Nightmare Apprentice, we have Chimera and Baphomet, both of which are level 6s, so we can make rank 6 cards. So if we're going first, we of course don't have just the option of sending Diabells or the Barrier Statue of the Abyss off of Baphomet's effect to the graveyard, but we can also summon Shyama from the graveyard to be able to make rank 6s, like, of course, Beatrice, DDD, High Wave King Caesar, Dragon Lark, and Photon Bouncer. One of the better versions of the play, of course, is making Beatrice, so that way you can still use Beatrice to dump maybe Tau or the actual target you want to summon from the graveyard, but also have more utilization on your opponent's turn with Beatrice, of course. The side deck, of course, is just an array of very good cards in this current format. The ones that we really want to be looking at, of course, is Droll and Lockbird, because it helps break boards by making them significantly weaker by, you know, stopping your opponent from doing things, but also making sure they don't have the crackback if you can't kill them. We, of course, have Emissary of the House of Wax. This is just essentially Spellbound, but for the battle phase, which is really good because, you know, Tempai Dragons. And then we have Tiger King Wengu, which is good against the Flu matchup, and also Snake Eyes. And then we have the End of the Anubis, which is just, it's just Abyss Dweller. What can I say there? For the extra deck, we of course have 1 Baphomet, 1 Chimera the Illusion Beast, 2 Chimera the Phantom Beast, 1 Garura because we're running Super Poly, 1 Guardian Chimera, mainly because we want more room for the rank 6s, but you can run a second one and just cut one of the rank 6s like Bouncer or Dragonlark. 1 Magnum the Reliever. We run a lot of Poly and Fusion spells in the deck, so this not only allows us to be able to recycle Polymerization, so maybe Patchwork is still live in the deck, but also it allows us to recycle Super Poly or just have the ability to pop cards on our opponent's turn. And then, of course, we have Mud Dragon and Dragos Tapelia, again, for Super Poly targets. As for the rank 6s, as I just went over, we have Beatrice, High Wave King Caesar, Dragonlark, and Photon Bouncer, but also we run Typhon and Little Knight. As I mentioned before, this is not my favorite version of the deck. However, I have tested around with it, and it has potential. It can do good things, but I think the branded version is still a lot more powerful. So moving on to my branded version of the deck, instead of hand traps, we run more board breaker style because that is just what branded does best. We are, of course, running the Aluber branded opening package. We run 1 Aluber and 2 branded opening. This is so that way we can also search branded fusion, but this deck does have one thing that it really wants, and it's protection for its fusion monsters, especially because illusions are kind of a counter to the Tempai Dragon archetype. However, Tempai still have the ability to like summon cards that can pop your monsters via card effect and then still try to go for the OTK then. So if you are able to summon out Chimera the Illusion Beast in defense mode and then be able to protect him from getting popped by card effect, then they still really can't break your board, and you can turn around and do an OTK on them. We, of course, are still running Barrier of the Abyss Statue for Dark Lock, essentially, and then we run the normal in-engine ratios of 2 Baphomet, 3 Kotal, 1 Diabells, 3 Mirror Sword Knight, 3 Gazelle, 1 Tau, 1 Emissary of the Wax Museum, and 3 Nightmare Apprentice. We are running Emissary in the main deck for this version of the build. I didn't want him clogging up the side deck, but also he has a little bit more utilization in the branded version. And then because we are running the branded version, we are running Versago the Destroyer. I have been seeing people run the Light Seal or the Witch with the third eye or whatever it's called instead of Versago. That's personally a personal choice. You can run any of them. I just think Versago has a little bit more utilization because he is a fiend, so he's not a dead draw in your hand because Chimera Fusion does require a fiend or a beast to be one of the materials used. Again, it comes down to personal choice. You can run one of the 3. It doesn't really matter. And then, of course, we are running 3 Branded Fusion and 2 Albaz. This is kind of like the right ratios because you want to see Branded Fusion, you don't want to see Albaz, but you want to make sure Branded Fusion is live if you use it the first time and you have the ability to use it again. Then, of course, 3 Chimera Fusion, because this is the kind of like the most important card in the deck. It's not the best card in the deck, but it's like the most important one. You want to be seeing this because it can recycle itself and, you know, make your big beater monsters. Still running the Edgent package. I'm running 2 Edgent Chain, 3 Patchwork, and 2 Poly. There is an argument to be made that you can run 3 Edgent Chain in this version of the build, or really in just Chimera in general, because it is a fiend that kind of replaces itself in a sense. I personally just prefer 2. I don't like bricking on this more than I should. And then, of course, we do run 2 Triple Tactics Talents, 3 Thrust, and 1 Fusion Duplication. Now, Fusion Duplication is a card that Branded uses, of course, with Thrust. I don't see a reason why not to run it in Chimera. We do run Chimera Fusion, and there are some hands where you just can't, you know, hang on to one even after recycling it from the graveyard. So being able to set Fusion Duplication and still be able to use Chimera Fusion is, of course, a plus. But then, of course, you know, we have Branded Fusion, we have Poly, we have plenty of utility for this card. There's just no reason not to run it. Now, because we are running the Branded package, I, of course, opted out of using Super Poly. You can try and cram it into this build, but the extra deck does get kind of tight when you're running the Branded monsters or the Albaz Fusions, so I opted to not use it. But for the extra deck, I'm running 2 Albion, the Branded Dragon. In older builds, I was only running 1 of this. However, 1, it gives us another, you know, pitch off of Mirror Jade, but it also, you know, lets us get to Branded Opening or Branded Fusion for the Crack Pack. 2 Baphomet, you can run 1. I prefer 2 because he just gives us dump material, essentially. We want our stuff in the graveyard so we can revive it. 1 Brigand. This card is kind of like a interesting tech choice that I'm doing. You can summon this off of Branded Fusion to be able to make it so, 1, he can't be destroyed in the battle phase, so he's kind of a pseudo illusion in a sense, but also your opponent cannot target monsters you control as long as he's on the field, other than, you know, they can target Brigand. But until then, until Brigand's off the board, your opponent cannot target your other monsters. Then we run 1 Chimera the Illusion Beast, 2 Chimera King of Phantom Beasts, 1 Guardian Chimera. Again, you can choose 2. I don't see the need for 2. 2 seems like a win more strategy in my personal opinion. If you're summoning the second one, you should already be on the winning curve, so just summoning the second one doesn't seem necessary. 1 Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. This is usually used to summon out the Dragoon. 1 Magnum, the Reliever. 1 Mirror Jade. 1 Dracostapelia, because even though we're not running Super Poly, this still can get summoned. And then Rinbrum. Rinbrum sees a lot more play in Chimera Branded than it does in Pure Branded. It actually gets summoned in Chimera Branded, simply because sometimes you just don't have access to the Illusion side of the deck or the Chimera side of the deck. So using Branded Fusion to send Gazelle and Albaz to the graveyard to make Rinbrum, and then Gazelle to search an Illusion monster, helps you get to that half of the deck. And like I said, we're running more of a board breaker version of the deck, so we are running Evenly Matched in the side, we are running Cosmic Cyclone, but we are still running Droll and Lockbird because, like I said, in the pure version, if you side it going second, and depending on the matchup, Droll and Lockbird can make the board that you're about to face a lot easier to break, and if you still don't kill them after breaking the board, then your opponent most likely doesn't have a whole lot of crackback. And then we are still running Tiger King Wangu and End of Anubis because Abyss Dweller, of course, is just a very powerful card. So being able to summon this on your opponent's turn if they're running a graveyard-focused deck is very powerful. But the Tiger King Wangu, again, good for the Floof matchup, good for Snake Eye. Just a very good card all around. So those are probably the 2 best versions of the deck. There is, of course, Chimera Horus. There is Runic Chimera. There's a couple of other builds for the deck. However, I think these are probably the 2 more prominent ones that you're going to be seeing at regionals and doing well at regionals. But with that, let's just jump on into what the combos are going to be looking like if you're going to be playing this deck. All right, so the good thing about Chimera is it is full of a bunch of 1-card starters that can get you to pretty much the entire deck. But the best example for probably the most ideal end board is Nightmare Apprentice plus 1 discard, and then the other 3 cards in your hand are just free. So to start, we'll do Nightmare Apprentice Inherent Summon to discard a card to special summon herself, and of course search an Illusion monster, which will of course be Cornfield Codal. Use Codal's effect to discard himself to be able to search a monster against Chimera Fusion. Sword Knight's the answer. Summon Sword Knight, effect, summon out the Baphomet, search Chimera Fusion and Gazelle. Then use Chimera Fusion to fuse into King of the Phantom Beasts. Now, the reason we want to go into King of the Phantom Beasts is because we want him into the graveyard, so we're going to be able to use him as fusion material on the recycled Chimera Fusion. Of course, on resolution of Chimera Fusion, we will be using Baphomet to target Mirror Sword Knight to resummon it, Gazelle to search an illusion, and Chimera to rip a card. So the card that we will be searching is Emissary of the Wax Museum. You can do any other illusion depending on what your hand's looking like. We'll do Chimera Fusion to return it to hand, use Chimera Fusion to fuse into the Baphomet, dumping any real target. It could be the statue, it could be really just anything, again, adapting around what the other 3 cards in your hand are, but in this example, we will dump Diabells. Now, on our opponent's draw phase, what we can do is use Chimera in the graveyard to special summon the Diabells from the graveyard, so we immediately have an anti-spell on our board. But also, during our opponent's turn, the Mirror Sword Knight can be used to special summon a Baphomet to be able to add Chimera Fusion and Gazelle to your hand, just having more cards in your hand, which realistically is very beneficial. If we have Branded Opening on the field, or we have Dragoon on the field, having cards in your hand is very beneficial. But also, we have Emissary, so that way when our opponent goes to the battle phase, not only do we have an illusion monster in defense mode, so it's hard to kill it, but also, once they end the battle phase, everything is spellbound. They can't be used for synchro summoning, XC summoning, link summoning, etc. But also, all of their effects are negated until your opponent's next battle phase. Now let's, of course, talk about choke points, because this is something that if you're playing the deck, you need to know so you can try and play around, but also something that if you're playing against the deck, you need to know so you can win. The biggest major choke point is, of course, Mirror Sword Knight. Now, you cannot imperm this or Veiler this or even Ghost Mourner it, because they all target, meaning that Mirror Sword Knight can chain and tribute for cost. But what you can do is save your Ash Blossom. Now, it's because of this that's why I think the branded version of the deck is the better version of the deck, because what I typically do is I'll use Branded Fusion to bait out the Ash Blossom if my opponent has it, because if you're going to have Branded Fusion resolve, you might as well just lose the game. That being said, when it comes to Chimera, I think the Chimera version of the deck is a lot stronger than the branded version of the deck. The branded version just supports the deck. So if you can get Mirror Sword Knight to get you into the rest of the deck, obviously that's what you're going to want. Now, the reason that Ash Blossom hurts this deck as much as it does is because this deck needs its normal summon. Less so now because of Nightmare Apprentice, but the deck still very much likes its normal summon. And when the deck first came out, Mirror Sword Knight was the go-to normal summon, or Gazelle. Either way, you had monsters conflicting for the normal summon. And if they Ash Blossomed your Mirror Sword Knight, well, you didn't have another normal summon, so you better hope the rest of your hand looks good. If they Imperm or Veilered your Gazelle, again, better hope the rest of your hand looks good. Now, the other problem here is that if you normal summon Sword Knight and they don't have Ash, but they have Imperm or Veiler, what comes out after the Sword Knight can still get hit. So it's because of this, Sword Knight is kind of the biggest choke point of the deck. Either you're going to Ash the Sword Knight or you're going to Imperm or Veiler what comes out immediate after, which is usually the Baphomet. Now, another choke point in the deck is the Nightmare Apprentice. This card gives you free access to all your illusion monsters, aka Kodal, Sword Knight, Emissary of the Wax Museum, Tau, or even Diabells. Now, unlike Sword Knight, she doesn't consume your normal summon. However, she does have that cost of pitching a card to the graveyard from your hand, so you go negative if this gets impermed or veilered. Another choke point in the deck could be using Imperm, Veiler, or Mourner when Baphomet or Chimera are fusion summoned to the board. The only problem with this is by the time they hit the board, it is safe to assume Kodal is in the graveyard at this point, which can protect them from being Veilered or Impermed. The thing is, that still makes you consume the Kodal, which means that if you want Kodal in the graveyard by your opponent's turn, you're going to have to take an alternate route to get the Kodal into the graveyard, which means you might not be taking the route you normally want to take. The second biggest choke point in this deck is Bestials and DD Crow. The reason being is because the Barrier Statue and Diabells prefer to be in the graveyard so they can be summoned for free from the graveyard via Chimera's effect on your opponent's turn, and they're both light and dark, meaning Bestials can hit them, but also Chimera Fusion, to recycle it, you need to return it from your graveyard to your hand by controlling a Chimera. If your opponent just has DD Crow to get rid of that, you're not really recycling the card, and you really don't have access to it ever again. And then probably the most obvious hit in the deck is this deck is going to always be playing under Nibiru, which is very prevalent in the current format, so you got to kind of either learn to play under 5 summons, or you got to get something to stop the Nibiru from, wiping you out. Typically, what I try to do is get Dragoon onto the board before 5 summons, so that way I can protect myself from Nibiru, but that is not always an option. And that's, of course, never an option if you are not running the branded version of the deck and you're going more pure style. And it's because of the fact that the deck gets hurt very severely at these very important points in the combo that the deck in the pure version runs called by and cross out, whereas in the branded version, we're really only running the called by. I have an older video up on the channel that I played Chimera branded at a regional when the deck first came out, and I was running cross out. And that's all I really have for you guys today on a in-depth look at the Chimera archetype. I hope you all learned from this video and either you know how to play the deck a lot better or you know how to play against the deck a lot better. But if you haven't already and you like content like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content like this, and I'll see you all in the next one. See ya!